Hi guys, welcome back. In the last session, we have seen how to Dockerize our applications, how to Dockerize Python application, and how to Dockerize React.js application, right? So Python is used to develop backend of the application. Java is also used to develop backend of the application. So in the real time, application front end will be developed as a separate project. For the front end, we have several technologies like Angular, React, and Vue.js. So yesterday, I have given the GitHub repository of React.js application. The React.js application Docker file look like this, and you just need to build the Docker image and you need to run the Docker image. Are you guys able to do that? Are you guys able to do that? Running the React.js application, and are you able to access? The React.js application will run on the port number 3000. Okay, good, fine. Next, today we are talking about another topic in the Docker, that is Docker network. So network is all about communication. Network is all about communication, right? So here, if you want to access some internet services, then we should have network for our system. So similarly in the Docker network concept is available. Network is all about communication, right? Docker network is used to provide network for Docker containers. Docker containers. Docker network is used to provide isolated network for Docker containers. So Docker container is running inside another virtual box, right? So the host machine should access that Docker container. So here, to provide the connectivity for the Docker containers, Docker will use Docker network concept. Docker network is all about communication. In the Docker, we have three default networks. In Docker, we have below three default networks. Below three default networks. What are those three default networks? First one is bridge network. Then second one is host network. And the third one is none network. So like this, there are three default networks available in the Docker. So what is the purpose of these three networks? So the Docker containers will be available. For those containers, Docker will provide the network, right? So for these networks, we have network drivers. For these networks in Docker, we have 5 network drivers. Networks are available. There are 3 default networks are available. And for those networks, we have network drivers. Network drivers are the one which will provide the network for our Docker containers. So what is the default network driver? That is bridge driver. This is the default network driver in the Docker. This is default network driver. And similarly, we are having host driver and we are having none driver. For every network, there is a network driver also. And the next one, we are having overlay network driver. Overlay network driver is used by Docker Swarm. And similarly, we are having Macmillan network driver. So like this in the Docker, we have a network. These are the 3 default networks that we have. So by default, these networks will be available. And for these networks, there are network drivers also available. So bridge network is having a bridge driver. If you don't specify any network, by default, Docker will use bridge network. And next one is host network. Third one is none. Fourth one is overlay. Overlay network will be used with the Docker Swarm. And the fifth one is Macmillan. So like that, there are several network drivers are available. Okay, guys. Now here, what is this bridge driver? So bridge driver is used to run the standalone container. Okay, guys. So bridge driver is recommended driver when we are running standalone containers. Bridge driver is recommended driver when we are using standalone containers. When we are running a standalone container, then it is recommended to go for bridge driver. It will assign one IP for our Docker container. So when we run a Docker container with the bridge driver, for that Docker container, it will assign one IP address. It will assign one IP address. Host driver is also used for standalone containers, but the difference is bridge driver will assign the IP for the container, whereas host driver will not assign the IP for the container. Host driver is also used to run standalone containers, but it will not assign any IP for container. So bridge driver will assign IP for the container, whereas host driver will not assign IP for the container. None means no network will be available for the Docker container. We don't use this. None means no network will be available for Docker container. No network will be available for Docker container. Are you guys getting my point? Bridge driver is recommended when we are using standalone containers. It will assign one IP for our Docker container. Host driver is also used to run standalone container, but it will not assign any IP for container. None means no network will be available for the Docker containers. Next one, overlay network is used for the orchestration platform. Docker Swarm is orchestration platform. Overlay network driver is used for orchestration purpose. So what is orchestration? We'll understand in another 2 to 3 days. So now Docker Swarm will use this overlay network driver. In the Docker, there is a concept called Docker Swarm. Docker Swarm will use this overlay network driver. Okay. Macmillan driver will assign a MAC address for the container. It makes our container. It provides one physical IP address. For our Docker containers. Macmillan network driver provides physical IP for container. Right. So like this, there are several Docker network drivers are available. Those network drivers will provide the network which is required for the Docker containers. So what is the Docker network? Network is all about communication. Docker network is used to provide isolated network for Docker containers. In Docker, we have below 3 default networks: bridge network, host network, none network. So bridge is the default network. For that networks, we have network drivers. Bridge is the default network driver. Host network, none network, overlay network is available, and Macmillan network is available. Bridge driver is recommended driver when we are using standalone container. It will assign one IP address for our Docker container. Host driver is also used to run standalone container, but it will not assign any IP for the container. None means no network will be available for the Docker container. Overlay network driver is used for orchestration. Docker Swarm will use this overlay driver. Macmillan network driver will provide physical IP address for the container. Okay, guys. Now here we can see how we can create our own network also. Docker is providing some default networks. We can also create our own network. First, let me start my Docker machine and let us see what are the networks available and how to create our own network in the Docker. Now, instances, Docker server. This is my Docker VM. Instance state started. So I'm starting my Docker VM. Once it is started, let's connect it to that Docker machine by using this mobile extra. SSH. The default username will be EC2 user, and private key I have to select as a PEM file, and remote host, public IP address. Okay. Connected to this machine, let me start the Docker engine. Sudo service docker start. Yeah, I have started our Docker service. Now here you can see I'm going to delete everything which is available here. Docker system prune -a. So whatever we used yesterday, whatever the containers we created, whatever the images we have created, I want to clean up everything. For that, we are using Docker system prune -a. See here, it reclaimed a total 3 GB of space. So many images, so many containers that we have created, I have deleted everything by using Docker system prune -a. Perfect. Next one. I want to check what are the networks available in the Docker. Now, can you see? When I execute a command called docker network ls, it is displaying what are the networks available. So what are the networks available? Bridge network available, host network available, and none network is available. So these are the 3 default networks that we are having in the Docker: bridge network, host network, and none network. Bridge network is using bridge driver, host network is using host driver. For none network, null is available. Okay. Now, when I am going to run my application, I want to use my own network. When I want to run my application, I want to use my own network. So to run application with our own network, then you can create the network also. Docker network create Ashok IT network. So here I'm using docker network ls command. What is the purpose of docker network ls command? Docker network ls command is used to display what all the Docker networks which are available. Now, I don't want to use the default network which provided by the Docker. For my application, I want to create my own network because my front-end application will be running and my back-end application will be running, my database will be running. All these 3 Docker containers I want to run on the same network so that they can communicate. Now, so front-end application will run in one container, back-end application will run in one container, database will run in one container. Now I want to combine, I want to run all these 3 containers in one network. So for that, I will create my own network. So to create our own network, we are going to use a command called docker network create Ashok IT network. Now I have created Docker network. Now let's go for docker network ls. When I use docker network ls, now you see I have created my own network. In this network, it is using bridge driver. Bridge is the default driver, default network driver that is available in the Docker. Right? Now here I'm able to create my own network. So now you can check what all the containers associated with our network. What all the containers associated with our network. For that, we can go for docker network inspect. Docker network inspect the network name. So what is our network name? Ashok IT network is available. Like this, we can inspect our Docker network also. So this is the name of the network. This is the ID. This is the created date, scope, what is the driver, and what are the containers which are associated with that network. Currently, nothing is available in this network. So just now I created my network. So we can delete the network also. Docker network ls. So Ashok IT network is created. Now I want to delete my network. For that, you can go for Docker network rm, that network ID or network name you can use. Network name or network ID. So whenever you create a network, it will use the bridge driver, and this is the network ID and this is the network name. You can use Docker network rm with the network name or with the network ID. I have removed Ashok IT network. Then go for Docker network ls. Now the 3 default networks are available. Whatever the network is there, I have deleted that. Now, let us see here. I want to run my application with the network that I have created. I want to run my application by using my own network. So let me pull one Docker image from the Docker Hub. Docker pull Ashok IT / Spring Boot REST API. Ashok IT / Spring Boot REST API. So in my Docker Hub account, this Docker image is available. I'm pulling this Docker image. Okay, guys. Now, let us check the images which we have, Docker images. So we have the Docker images here. We got Ashok IT Spring Boot REST API. So we can inspect this Docker image and we can run this image. When we run this image, Docker container will be created. Okay, guys. Now, I want to run the Docker container by using this Docker image with the Ashok IT network. So what are the networks available? Docker network LS. My network is not available. I want to create my own network and I want to run the container on my own network. So how to run the container on our network? First, let me create the network. Docker network create Ashok IT network. Yes, with this my network is created. You can check this Docker network LS. Ashok IT network is created by using bridge driver. Fine. Now image is available and a network is available. Image is available and network is available. Docker network LS and Docker images. Image is available, Ashok IT Spring Boot REST API image and Docker network LS. My network is also available. Now I want to run my application with my own network in the Docker. Why? Because tomorrow, whatever the other containers I have, those other containers also I will run with my own network. Those other containers also I will run with my own network. Fine. So earlier we used it to execute the command like this. Docker run -d -p the port number, something like this, 8080:9090. Guys, in this particular image, my application, the Tomcat Spring Boot application will use embedded server. That embedded server port number I configured as 9090. So here 8080 is the host port, 9090 is the container port. So in this particular image, my application will be running on the port number 9090. Okay. Then after we use it to specify image name. So what is the image name? Ashok IT / Spring Boot REST API. Now, if I use it, it will go for the default network. Now, if I run this command, it will take this Docker image and it will create the Docker container. It will create the Docker container. Okay, guys. Now here, I want to attach this to a custom network. So for that, we will use --network space. What is the network name? Ashok IT network, like this. So when you want to run the container, with your own network, you need to specify network like this. So Docker run -d -p port mapping, and this is the network that I want to use to run this container, and this is the image name to create the container. Now run this. So with this, our Docker container started. With this, our Docker container started. You can see that Docker PS. So when you execute the Docker PS, you can see here the container is created. This is the image I used to create the container. Just 9 seconds ago, my container created. Host port is 8080, container port is 9090. Now let's go to our public IP, then try to access our application :8080. So when I execute :8080 /welcome name is equal to some value or /welcome. Application is running, the URL pattern might be different. /welcome Ashok. Now you see Ashok, welcome to Ashok IT. So this is the URL. You can give any name here. If you give the name as Raja, it will give Raja, welcome to Ashok IT. So whatever the name you give, with that name, it is going to generate the message and it will return that message. Now my application is running in the container. that container is having a network. So the Docker network is available. So the Docker network, there are predefined networks are available, and we can create our own networks also. When we are going to run multiple containers, then we will create our own network and we will use that network to run all the containers. So if you want to establish communication from one container to another container, those containers should be running in the same Docker network. If the containers are running, and if you want to connect from one container to another container, front end will run in one container, front end application will run in one container, back end application will run in another container, database will run in another container. Front end container should be able to access the back end container, back end container should be able to access database container. So when you want to establish communication from one container to another container, those containers should be in the same network. Then only we can communicate. Otherwise, we cannot communicate. Are you guys clear? So when you are establishing the communication from one container to another container, those containers should be on the same network. Okay. So now what are the commands I have used here? Display Docker networks. How to display the Docker networks? Docker network ls command. Create Docker network. How I have created a Docker network? Docker network create network name. Now, how to inspect the Docker network? Inspect Docker network. Inspect the Docker network. So to inspect the Docker network, we have a command called Docker network inspect network name or network ID. So which network you want to inspect, that network name you can provide here. I created Ashoka network. I want to use that. Now, so run Docker container using our network. Run Docker container with our network. So what we need to do? Docker run -d -p, the port mapping, something like this, 9090:9090 port mapping, and next one -- network, then Ashok IT - network, image name Ashok IT Spring Boot REST API. So like this, I am attaching our network to our Docker container. How to attach our network to Docker container? By using this option. network, I'm giving the network name. So how to delete the Docker network? So to delete the Docker network, delete Docker network. So to delete the Docker network, we will use Docker network RM. Docker network RM network name. When it is using by the container, we can't delete it. First, we need to stop the container and then we need to remove that network. Now my network is using by the container. My container is in the running mode. By using Docker PS, we can see what is the status of the container. My container is currently in the running state. So when the container is in the running state, we can't delete the network. Okay, guys. Now I want to stop this container. How to stop this container? You can use Docker stop container ID. So Docker stop container ID, my container got stopped. Docker PS, no container is in the running state. So when the container is in the stopped state, you can execute Docker system prune -a. So what it is saying that? What it is saying that? All this will remove. Whenever I use Docker system prune -a, this will remove all stopped containers, all networks not used by at least one container. Any network which is available, but it is not using by at least one container, that networks also will be deleted. All images without at least one container and all the build cache will be deleted. Like this, we can delete that also. So now everything will be deleted. So now I stopped my container. So the stopped container is deleted. When the stopped container is deleted, the network is not using by any container. So that network also deleted and all the images also deleted. So Docker system prune to clean up everything which is not using. To clean up everything which is not using. Are you guys clear? How to check the Docker networks which are available and how to create our own network? and how to attach a network to the Docker container. How to attach network to the Docker container. Come on, guys. Yep. Next one, the most important concept in the Docker, that is Docker Compose. The another most important concept in the Docker, that is Docker Compose. Okay, guys. Now Docker Compose. So what is the purpose of Docker Compose? Now here, if you observe, as I discussed, our application will have architecture like this. Front end will be available, back end will be available, and a database will be available. Now, front end will be running as one container. Front end will be running as one container. In the back end, multiple containers will be available as microservices architecture, and the database will run as another container. So now here we need to create 3 Docker images, and we need to create 3 containers, and these 3 containers should run on the same network, and we need to establish communication between these networks. Okay, guys. So every application here running in the separate container and creating the 3 containers, managing the 3 containers, running 3 containers in the network, that will become difficult process. Tomorrow, if our application is microservices based application, so what is the meaning of microservice based application? So in the microservices, assume that. So in the microservices application, so I have hotels booking functionality. For that, hotels API is available. I have train tickets booking functionality in my project. For that, trains API is available. I have flight tickets booking functionality in my project. For that, flights API is available. I have cabs booking functionality in my project. For that, cabs API is available. And I am having a reports API in my project. And I have a admin functionality in our project. So these all are belongs to one project, but we are developing in the microservices. So if we develop everything in the single application, that is called as a monolith application. Currently, people are going for microservices application. Hotels booking functionality available in one project, trains booking functionality available in one project, flights booking functionality available in one project, cabs booking functionality available in one project, reports understanding the project reports available in one project, admin functionality available in one project. For all these projects, we are having one user interface. User interface is available in the another project. Front end is available in the another project. And for these projects, databases are available. So this application will have its own database, and every application is having its own database because these are microservices. Hotels API DB available, and trains API DB available, flights API DB available, cabs API DB available, reports API DB available, admin API DB is available. Now, so hotels API needs a DB, trains API needs a DB, flights API needs a DB, cabs API, reports API, admin API. And the users are accessing the front end of the application. From the front end, request will come to the back end applications. So front end, back end, and database. So in the front end, user interface, one application will be available. That application may be developed by using React.js or Angular. Now, what about the back end? Do we have one project in the back end? We have couple of projects in the back end. Do we have one project in the back end? Do we have couple of projects in the back end? We have couple of projects in the project. So we have couple of projects in the back end. Are you guys getting my point? Are you guys getting my point? Yes. Now, how many Docker containers I need to create for this application, guys? Can you tell me? My application will be developed as a microservices architecture like this. Front end is available, back end is available. Front end is available, back end is available. How many Docker containers I need to create for this application? How many Docker containers I need to create for these applications? total in the backend, 6 APIs available. Okay. Now here, front end, for the front end application, 1 container. Okay. In the backend application, for the backend, I need to create 6 containers because there are 6 APIs available in the backend. For 6 APIs, I need to create the 6 containers. Database. There are 6 databases are available. I need to create 6 containers. So total, I need to create 13 containers. Total, I need to create 13 containers to run my application. So this is what is happening in the industry. User interface is available, backend APIs are available, and database is available. Earlier, 5-6 years back, people used to develop everything in one project. If we develop everything in one project, then that is called as monolith application. But today, people are not going for monolith application. People are going for microservices application. Microservice means the project functionality will be divided into multiple services. Microservices means the project functionality will be divided into multiple services. So to divide the project into multiple services, microservices will be developed. Hotels booking functionality. The project contains a hotels booking functionality. Hotels booking functionality developed as one separate project that will connect with one separate database. It should run in a separate server. Trains booking functionality available in one project. That is separate project. It will connect with a separate database. Similarly, flights, cabs, reports, admin. So like this, I'm taking 6 microservices in the application. So these 6 microservices are nothing but 6 small projects. So I'm taking only 6 microservices. A project may have 20 microservices also. A project may have 50 microservices also. For every microservice, one Docker container should be created, one DB container should be created. If I have 20 microservices, 20 backend containers, 20 database containers, one front-end container. So is it easy to manage all these 13 containers, create first container, create second container, create third container, create fourth container? Is it easy to manage these containers creation, guys? Is it easy to manage these containers easily? 13 containers we are creating now because we have 6 microservices in the backend. If I have 50 microservices in the backend, if I have 50 microservices in the backend, then what we need to do? How many containers you need to manage? 100 plus containers we need to create manually. Container 1, container 2, container 3, container 4, and so on, container 100. So creating these Docker containers manually for all these microservices is very, very, very difficult task. In the application, our application requires multiple containers. Our application requires multiple containers. So example, front-end application container, and back-end application containers, microservices, multiple small projects will be available, and DB containers are required for our application. Okay, so our application requires multiple containers. Front-end application requires 1 container. Backend applications requires several containers because we are going for microservices, and the database containers will be available. So running the containers manually, creating the containers manually is a difficult process. Creating containers manually is very difficult and time-taking process. So in the real time, project will be developed using microservices architecture. Nowadays, projects are developing with microservices architecture. Projects are developing based on microservices architecture. So what is the meaning of microservices architecture, guys? One project will be divided into several small projects. Earlier, people used it to develop everything in the single project, but nowadays they are not going for the monolith. Monolith is an outdated approach. So people are using microservices based architecture. Nowadays, projects are developing based on microservices architecture. So our application requires multiple containers for execution. Our application requires multiple containers for execution. Front-end application requires one container. Backend application containers, backend APIs containers. So project will have multiple APIs, multiple containers, and database containers are required. So creating containers manually, creating multiple containers manually is very difficult and time-taking process. Very difficult and time-taking process. So to avoid the problems with the multi-container based applications, managing multi-container based applications is difficult. Managing multi-container based applications. Managing multi-container based applications is difficult task. What is the meaning of multi-container based application, guys? Can you tell me? What is the meaning of multi-container based application? What is the meaning of multi-container based application? Any idea? Nowadays, projects are developing based on microservices architecture. So when we are going for the microservices architecture, we will develop multiple small projects for our application, small APIs for our application. So for every API, one container is required. For a database, containers are required. For backend APIs, containers are required. For front-end application, containers are required. Creating multiple containers manually is very difficult and time-taking process. So what is the meaning of that? Managing multiple containers, managing multi-container based application is a difficult task. So multi-container based application means front-end containers, back-end containers, database containers, creating them manually is very difficult task. So earlier, 5-6 years back, people used to develop the application as a monolith application. When you go for the monolith application, everything will be available in the single project. One container is required. But today, people are going for microservices application. For the microservices application, multiple containers are required. So our application requires multiple containers for the execution. Managing multi-container based applications is difficult task. To solve this multi-container based application problem, we are going for Docker Compose. What is the concept, guys? We are going for Docker Compose. So Docker Compose we will use to manage multi-container based applications. Docker Compose is used for managing multiple containers. Docker Compose is used to manage multiple containers. So if you don't use the Docker Compose, you need to take care of containers creation and you need to take care of managing the containers. For example, I want to run my application. How many I have my application? I want to run my application. How many containers we should create? In this scenario, how many containers we need to create? 13 containers we need to create. After 1 hour, I want to stop my containers. How many containers we need to stop? All the 13 containers we need to stop. So creating the containers, stopping the containers, manually doing all these things very difficult. So managing multi-container based applications is a difficult task. So to overcome that problem, we are using a software called Docker Compose. Docker Compose is used for managing multiple containers. Okay, guys, right. Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage multi-container based applications. Creating the containers, stopping the containers, everything will be taken care by Docker Compose. We no need to do that manually. So if you want to run the 30 containers also, with a single command, you can create the 30 containers. If Docker Compose is not available, you need to create each and every container manually. That is very difficult. To overcome that problem, we are going for Docker Compose. So what is this Docker Compose? Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage. Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage, multi-container based application. Multi-container based application means one application requires multiple containers for execution. Front-end container, back-end container, database container. Multiple containers will be available. Using Docker Compose, we can easily set up and deploy multiple containers. Now here, for the Docker, we will give how many containers we want to run for our application. We will use Docker compose.yml file to provide containers information to Docker Compose. Now, how many containers we have to create for our application? How many containers we need? That information we will write in a file called docker compose.yml. This Docker Compose YML, we will give the input to Docker Compose. Okay. Docker Compose YML should contain all the containers related information. Okay. Docker Compose YML should contain all the information related to containers creation. So I want to create 20 containers. So what containers you need to create? What images it has to use to create the containers? Those are things we are going to specify in the Docker Compose YML. Docker Compose is a tool in the Docker which is used to manage multi-container based application. Multi-container means our application requires multiple containers for the execution. Managing multiple containers manually, creating the containers one by one, stopping the containers one by one, deleting the containers one by one is very difficult. So to avoid that problem, we are going for Docker Compose. So what is this Docker Compose? Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage multi-container based applications. Right? Easily we can create multiple containers with the help of Docker Compose. How Docker Compose will understand what containers you want to create, which images we have to use to create the container. Every container will be created by using a different image. So which image it should use for first container, which image it should use for second container, which image it should use for third container, like that. That information we need to specify in the Docker Compose YML. Docker Compose YML should contain all the information related to Docker containers. For example, front-end container should use front-end application, front-end image. Back-end API should use back-end images. Database container should use database image, like this. So which container should be created by using which image, that we will specify in the Docker Compose YML. So Docker Compose YML should contain all the information related to containers creation. Okay. So Docker Compose YML file. So what will be there in the Docker Compose YML file? Docker Compose YML file contains mainly 4 sections, guys. Version section will be available in this YML file. Services will be available in this YML file. Network will be available in this YML file. Volumes will be available in this YML file. So like this, we are going to use Docker Compose file. Version of the Docker Compose. Services. Services nothing but our containers that you want to create. So how many containers we want to create? Those containers information will configure as services. Front-end container, back-end container, database container. So I will configure the containers information as services in the Docker Compose. And a network. As we are creating multiple containers, under which network those containers should be created for the communication. So whatever the network that we create, that network we can configure. And values. We did not discuss about the volumes as of now. Volumes are used for storage purpose. So first I will show you one example with the Docker Compose. What is the problem if I don't use volumes, and what is the advantage if I use the volumes? I will show you that. So for time being, remember, volumes are used for storage purpose. When my container is executing, some data will be stored in the database. When the container is deleted, we will lose the data from the database. So even if my container is stopped or my container is deleted, I don't want to lose the data. So I want to make my Docker container as a stateful container. So for that, we need to use the volume. Volumes are used for storage purpose. Network. In the Docker Compose, we are going to specify multiple containers creation. So those containers should be created under which network, that we can specify by using the network. Network is all about the communication. When the containers are running on the same network, they can connect with each other and version will be available. The default Docker Compose file name. The default Docker Compose default file name is docker-compose.yml. So like this, we are going to specify Docker Compose YML. Let me show you one simple example of the Docker Compose YML, which I have in my GitHub. Right? Yeah. Spring Boot application with the MySQL database. I want to run the Spring Boot application with MySQL. Boot application will run in one container. Database will run in one container. Now let's go to here. Docker file is available. What is this Docker file? This Docker file contains our information to Dockerize the Spring Boot application. Already we know that from OpenJDK, expose, copy the jar file from the target location to some that location and entry point to run the jar. So to create the Docker image for the Spring Boot application, Docker file is available. Now here, not only Spring Boot application, I want to run the MySQL database also for the backend. So Spring Boot application will run in one container. MySQL database should run in the another container. So for that, I'm using Docker Compose. So what is the Docker Compose here? Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage multi-container based application. Using Docker Compose, we can easily set up and deploy multiple containers. So how to run the multiple containers? How the Docker Compose will know about our containers? That's where we will use Docker Compose YML file. In the Docker Compose YML file, we need to provide containers information to Docker Compose. Docker Compose YML should contain all the information related to containers creation. Docker Compose YML will contain 4 sections. One is version, second one is services, third one is network, fourth one is volumes. So what is the default file name? Docker-compose.yml is the default file name. Go to this Docker Compose YML. You can see here version is available and services are available and networks are available and volumes also we can specify. So what is the network? So under which network you want to run your containers? So Spring Boot application will run in one container. MySQL database will run in one container. So here, which containers you want to create, those things we are going to specify under services. These containers should be created under which network, those things we are going to specify in the network. And volumes will be available. Volumes are used to represent the storage location of our containers. Now see, version:3. Let me increase the font size. Yeah, version:3 and services. I want to run my application. This is the image name for my Spring Boot application. So the port mapping I am doing directly here only. So container port is 8080, host port is 8080. So this Spring Boot application should run on the network Spring Boot database network. And this Spring Boot application depends on the MySQL DB. Spring Boot depends on the MySQL DB. So this is application image information. Under services, I'm specifying application. I'm telling that application should be created by using this image and application should be mapped to 8080 port. Application container should be created under this network. Application depends on the database image and application volumes. I'm specifying this. So this is one container information. And similarly, another container information, MySQL database. I want the image name I want this image to create MySQL database container. This MySQL database also should run on the same network. Whatever the network that is using by our application, our database also using the same network. For the MySQL database, this should be the password and this should be the database name and this is the value. And this is the value. When I specify the network here, it will create this network and application will use that network. Database also will use this network. So this is representing one container information. This is representing another container information. So now I have this Docker Compose YML. But when I run this Docker Compose YML, it is going to create application container and database container in the same image and in the same network, and application can connect to the database. So that is the main purpose of the Docker Compose. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? What is Docker Compose? Docker Compose is used for managing multiple containers. That is a tool to manage multi-container based applications. Which containers the Docker Compose has to manage, we will specify in the Docker Compose YML file. What is there in the Docker Compose YML file? Version available, services available, network available, values available. So what is the default file name for the Docker Compose? Docker-compose.yml is the file name. In that file, we will write the configuration like this. What is the version? What are the services? Application service, database service, and networks and values. Yeah, we will write this file, guys. Don't worry. We will write this file. Okay, guys. So you understand what is Docker Compose and why we need to go for Docker Compose? Basic idea. Guys, you understand what is Docker Compose? Satish, for your question, answer is yes. Yeah. Could you please respond, guys? What is Docker Compose? Why we need to go for Docker Compose? What is the purpose of Docker Compose? To manage multiple containers. Docker Compose is used to manage multiple containers. So now I want to create 10 containers. So do I need to execute the command 10 times, or I will keep everything in the Docker Compose and I will execute one command? Where this Docker Compose file will be available? Docker Compose file we will keep in source code repository. So where our Docker file is available, in the same place Docker Compose YML also will be available. Now tell me, what is the purpose of Docker file and what is the purpose of Docker Compose file? Two files are available. What is the purpose of Docker file and a Docker Compose file? Come on, guys. What is the purpose of Docker file and Docker Compose file? Come on. Docker file is used to create the Docker image. Docker file is used to create the Docker image. Docker Compose is used to manage multiple containers. Docker file is used to create the Docker image. Docker Compose is used to create manage multiple containers. Now, when we install the Docker, by default, Docker Compose will not be available in our machine. Let us see here. Docker Compose --version. So is it able to recognize what is the Docker Compose? In my system, Docker is available. When I go for Docker -version, I'm getting that. Okay. So when I go for Docker -v, Docker version is I'm getting. When I go for Docker Compose -v, am I able to get the Docker Compose or I am not able to get the Docker Compose? Docker Compose available in my system. Docker Compose is not available in my system. Docker Compose available in my system or Docker Compose not available in my system? Docker Compose is not available in my system. Are you clear, guys? Now we need to install Docker Compose. Okay. Let me take the commands to install Docker Compose. So we need to install Docker Compose software in our machine. So let me copy the command which is used to install the Docker Compose software. Yeah. Docker Compose setup. Install Docker Compose. Installing Docker Compose. It will not come by default, guys. We are installing Docker Compose. We have Docker, but we don't have Docker Compose in our machine. So I'm going to install Docker Compose. So how to install the Docker Compose? Let us see. So here I'm in the EC2 instance, ls-l. Here I have my applications which I have cloned from the GitHub repository. Now, if in order to download the Docker Compose, take this command and execute it. Sudo curl, it is used to download the Docker Compose software. Now, ls-l. So here I have given the output to be stored into user local bin Docker Compose. So by using curl command, I'm downloading the Docker Compose software and it's stored into user local bin directory. So once it is done, give the permission for the user to execute this Docker. Okay. Now I have given sudo chmod. I'm giving the permission. How to check the Docker Compose is installed or not? To check this, I'm using Docker Compose --version. So with this, it is giving me Docker Compose version, which is 1.24.0. So build is there. Docker Compose is installed in our machine. So Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage multi-container based applications. I want to run multiple containers. For that, I'm going for Docker Compose. Installing Docker Compose. So here, Docker Compose YML file will be available. I will tell you how to write this YML file. So first, let me take the project and let me run this Docker Compose. Already, we are having a project in the GitHub. Take that project and clone that project. Git clone. So this project is using Spring Boot with the MySQL database. Cloning that project. Now, ls-l, Spring Boot MySQL Docker Compose, cd space that project directory. Now, ls-l. Now in this project, src is available, pom.xml is available, Docker file is available, Docker Compose file is also available. Let me do maven clean package. I need to get the jar file for the project. To get the jar file for the project, we will go for maven clean package. Maven clean package. So it is going to create the jar file. It will package our application as a jar file. See here, Spring Boot -mysql.jar file is created in the target directory. Let us go for ls-l. Earlier, the target directory not available. Now I got that target directory also. ls-l space target. Now Spring Boot -mysql.jar file is created. Okay. So in this Docker compose YML, what is the Docker image name I am giving? Spring Boot MySQL app is the image name we are giving. Now let me go for Docker system prune-a. I want to delete everything. So nothing is available in my system. Let me go for Docker images. Nothing is available. Docker PS, nothing is available. In my project, Docker file is available. What is the purpose of the Docker file? The Docker file is used to create the Docker image. Once the Docker image is created, I want to create the Docker container. Earlier, we created the container manually. Now we can create the container by using Docker Compose. What is there in this Docker Compose? I specified application container should be created, database container should be created, and application should connect with the database. Application container should be created and database container should be created and application should connect with the database. Okay, guys. Now, first let me build the Docker image. Docker build -t space image name space dot. What is the image name is using by the container here? Spring Boot -MySQL app space dot. So with this, my Docker image is creating. With this, my Docker image is creating. Once the Docker image is created, I want to run my container. Application container, database container. For MySQL, there is an image for the MySQL database. What is the name of the MySQL? Image name MySQL colon 5.7. This is the public image. If anybody want to install the MySQL database by using Docker, they can use this image name. And this is my application image name, which I am creating now. My application image is created. You can check it. Docker images. Spring Boot MySQL app image is created. Whatever the database is a public image. It will be downloaded from the Docker library. It will be downloaded from the Docker library. And this is my application image. Just now I have created. This is the image which I am getting from the Docker library. So with this, application image is ready. Database is image, public image. We can get that image. Once the Docker image is ready, now I want to create the container. So do you know how to create the Docker container based on the Docker image? Docker run command and image name we will give. And we need to attach that, we need to create a network and we need to create the container by attaching to the network. We need to create the volume. Volume we need to attach to the container. Management will become difficult if you are doing that manually. So to avoid that problem only, we are going for Docker Compose. Now, in my project directory, Docker Compose YML is already available. What is the code available in the Docker Compose? Version 3, services are available and network is also available, volumes are available. So what is the meaning of services? Services represents how many containers you want to create. So this is application container data and this is database container data. Now, when you have the Docker Compose in the project directory, let's check Docker PS, nothing is available. Docker Compose PS, are there any containers which are running using Docker Compose? No. Let me do one command execution, which is Docker Compose up. Guys, when I execute Docker Compose up command, it will take this Docker Compose YML. It will check how many services are available. For all the services, it will create the Docker containers. So to create the Docker containers by using Docker Compose YML, we will use a command called Docker Compose up command. In my Docker Compose, I specified two containers. So one is application container, another one is database container. Now check it, Docker Compose up, that's it. Now creating a network. It is creating the Docker network and it is pulling the MySQL database from the MySQL library. It is a public image. I told that my application requires a database. It is downloading the MySQL database. For my application, network is required. I specified the network here. I no need to create the network manually. Docker Compose is creating that network for us. Now, my application container is creating now. Spring Boot application container creating. I did not use detached mode. So that's why it is starting my application. Yes, you can see application is started. You can see application is started. So what is the command I have executed, guys? I have given one command called docker compose up command. It created a network. It pulled the MySQL database and it created the MySQL database container by downloading the MySQL image from the Docker Hub, and it is creating the Spring Boot application container. And finally, my application started. So am I doing the containers creation manually? Am I using Docker Compose to create the containers? Am I creating the containers manually? I have executed just one command called docker compose up command from the Docker Compose. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? How I am creating multiple containers easily? Now, let's try to access our application. Tomcat server started on the port number 8080. Let me take the public IP of my machine. Take the public IP colon 8080. Public IP colon 8080. Now you see my application is opened. This is a bookstore application which I developed by using Spring Boot. Bookstore application developed by using Spring Boot. Let me add the book name. I'm adding the book name as a Spring Boot. Author name is Rod Johnson. Book price is 1000. Click on submit. Now see, my application is maintaining the data. Now let me add the another book name, Java. Java author is Gosling and book price is 500. Click on submit. Now see, Java application data is stored here. So the application is developed by using Spring Boot and the data is storing in the MySQL database. So application is running in one container, database is running in one container. Am I creating the containers manually? Am I using Docker Compose? I'm using Docker Compose. So how I use Docker Compose? My application is having a Docker file. Using the Docker file, I'm able to create the Docker image. Using the Docker image, I'm able to create the container. But the container I am not creating manually. For the containers creation, I'm using Docker Compose. What is the Docker Compose? Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage multi-container based applications. So now, whatever the application that we are accessing now, is it single container based application or is it multi-container based application? Whatever the application we can see, is it a single container based application or is it multi-container based application? Multi-container based applications. Okay. Once the Docker Compose is installed, Spring Boot with MySQL, Spring Boot plus MySQL, Spring Boot plus MySQL with Docker Compose. Okay, guys. So what we need to do is the first step that you need to do, clone the project. Clone the project. How to clone the project? Git clone my repository URL. So in the Git, I pushed my code. Developers will push the code to the GitHub. So I have given the code in the GitHub repository. This project contains a Spring Boot with MySQL using Docker Compose. Now, cd space project directory. You go inside the project. First, you need to build that project. MVN clean package to build that project. Once that package build process is completed, then build the Docker image. Docker build -t. What is the image name you need to use? This is the image name. You can't change the image name because my Docker Compose file is referring to this image. You need to build the Docker image with this command. First, you need to clone the GitHub repository. Then you need to go inside the project directory. Then you do MVN clean package. Then you build that Docker image and give the image name like this only. Don't change the image name. If you change the image name, my Docker Compose cannot identify that image. In the Docker Compose file, I have used this image name for the application. Okay, guys. So Docker build -t image name space dot. With this Docker image will be created. You can check Docker images. Once the Docker image is created, you simply need to execute Docker Compose up -d. -d means detached mode. What is the purpose of Docker Compose Up? Docker Compose Up is used to create the Docker containers based on the Docker Compose file. Do you guys getting my point? Docker Compose Up -d, it is used to create the Docker containers based on the Docker Compose file configuration. In the Docker Compose file, what configuration is there? Application container information available. Database container information is available. It will read from the top to bottom. But if you observe, in the application configuration, I specified it depends on MySQL DB. I specified my application is depends on the MySQL. So that's why Docker Compose will create MySQL database container first. Then it will create the application container. So I specified it depends on. It will read from top to bottom only, not from bottom to top. It will read from the top to bottom only, but first priority it will give for the networks. Okay, so network is created. After the network is created, then it will try to go for the application. Application is having dependency with the database. So first it will create the database. This is the database name I have given here. So this database name it will use, it will create the database container. How it is creating the database container? It is downloading the MySQL database image from the Docker Hub and it is creating the MySQL database. So once the MySQL database is created, application created, application container created. Then my application can connect with the database. We are able to access our application. We are able to store the data in the database. So if I add one more record, then that record will be stored into the database. Are you guys clear? Yes, we need to create the Docker images manually before running the Docker Compose. Because in the Docker Compose file, we need to specify the image name, which image it has to use to create the container. So for application container, it has to use this image. We have to create this image first. For the database, it has to use MySQL is a public image. Anybody can download that. So once you have done this process, you can verify the containers which are created. -d means detached mode. Your terminal will be open to execute the next command. So here you can go for Docker Compose PS command. What is the purpose of Docker Compose PS command? It is used to display what all the containers it is running. Docker Compose PS, it is used to see what all the containers running. If you want to delete the containers, Docker Compose down command. To create the containers, Docker Compose up command. Up is used to create the containers. Down is used to remove the container in the Docker Compose. Earlier we used Docker run command. So earlier we used the Docker run command that is used to create the container manually. Now I don't want to create the containers manually. The containers will be created by using Docker Compose up command. Which containers it has to create? The containers information should be specified in the Docker Compose YML. Docker image creation you have to do. Containers creation will be taken care by Docker Compose. I want to run 100 containers at a time. Compose up. That's it. 100 containers will be created. I want to delete the containers. Docker Compose down. It is used to delete the containers. Are you guys able to follow me? Now. So this is working procedure to deploy Spring Boot application with MySQL database with Docker Compose. Deploy Spring Boot with MySQL database using Docker Compose. Are you guys able to follow me? Deploy Spring Boot application with MySQL database using Docker Compose. Come on. Fine. So Docker Compose commands. So what are the Docker Compose commands that we should know? Docker Compose commands will be available. In the tomorrow session, I will tell you how to write the Compose file also, guys. Today I have used existing file in the repository. Tomorrow I will tell you how to write the Docker Compose file also. Today I want you people to install the Docker Compose and run the application by using Docker Compose. These are the commands that you need to use. That's it. Docker Compose commands. Right. What is the Docker Compose command? Here you can specify Docker Compose up. Create containers using Docker Compose. For that, Docker Compose up. So you need to have a Docker Compose file. When you have the Docker Compose file, when you execute a Docker Compose up command, it will use the compose file and it will create the Docker containers which are specified in the compose file. Okay. If you change the file name, create containers using different file name. In that scenario, we need to go for Docker compose -f file name space up. Okay, then it is going to consider the file which we have given. The default file name will be docker-compose.yml, but it's not mandatory. You can change that file name also. When you change that file name, you need to supply that file name as an input. Okay, so run the Docker containers in the detached mode. Run Docker containers in detached mode. To run the Docker containers in the detached mode, Docker compose up-d. Up-d is used to represent Docker containers in the detached mode. What is the meaning of detached mode? Now I created my container. When I create my container, my terminal is not open to execute the command. Only logs are printing. I'm not able to execute the command. So I want to create the containers and I should be able to check the logs of the container, all that stuff. Then you can go for -d. Okay, guys. Now here, display containers created by Docker Compose. Display containers created by Docker Compose. So to check the containers which are created by the Docker Compose, we can use a command called Docker Compose PS command. All the containers which are started by Docker Compose, we can display those containers by using Docker Compose PS command. Okay. Now, what are the images which are used by the Docker Compose? Display Docker images. For that, we can go for Docker Compose images also. Docker Compose images. Stop the Docker containers. Stop and remove Docker containers. To do that, we will go for Docker-compose down. Up is used to create the containers. Down is used to stop and remove the containers. So these are Docker compose commands that we are going to use. These are the compose commands that we are going to use. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? What is the Docker Compose and why we need to use the Docker Compose? Nowadays, the projects are developing with multiple containers with microservices architecture. So when we have multiple containers, managing them, running them manually is difficult. So I should be able to create the multiple containers easily. For that, Docker provided a tool called Docker Compose. Docker Compose is a tool which is used to manage multi-container based applications. Using Docker Compose, we can easily set up and deploy multiple containers. So we will use Docker Compose YML to provide the containers information to the Docker Compose software for the Docker Compose tool. Docker Compose can create multiple containers, but which containers it has to create, which Docker image it has to create the containers, that we need to specify. Okay. So in the Docker Compose YML, mainly these sections will be available. Version, services, network, values. Version is 3 and services. What are the containers you want to create? That we will specify as services. Which network we need to use to create the Docker containers, we will specify in the network. Network also will be created by the Compose only. You no need to create it manually. Volumes are used for storage. Tomorrow we will understand how to write the Docker file, then why we need to go for the Docker volumes. What is the default file name for the Docker? Docker compose.yml. If required, we can change it also. You can give any name for that. So Docker compose file we will keep in the source code repository itself. Now you see my GitHub repository is available. In that repository, my project source code is available. In that, my Docker file is available, as well as my Docker compose YML is also available. Okay, guys. Installing the Docker compose. How to install the Docker compose? These are the commands. Guys, this is a single command. you need to take completely. This is a single command, execute. So give the permission and check the version. So like this, you can install the Docker Compose in your machine. Once the Docker Compose is installed, you need to deploy the Spring Boot application with MySQL database. Spring Boot is our backend application. MySQL is a database which is public database. Anybody can use free software. So this project you need to clone, go inside the project, do the Maven package. When you do the Maven package, then you can build the Docker image. Once the Docker image is created, you can create the container by using Docker Compose. Once the container is created, you can see the containers which are created. Access the application. Access the application. How to access the application? That is URL based. http:// public IP. We need to use the public IP of our machine :8080. Container is running on the 8080. Target also running on, host is also mapped to 8080. Here I have done the port mapping also. Container port, host port, 8080. So if you access this URL, you should be able to see this application. If you access this URL, you should be able to see this application. See, people inserted some data. Now we are able to see all the records which are available in our application. Now, what are the commands that we are using to work with the Docker? So when you have Docker Compose YML, Docker Compose up command, it is used to create the Docker containers. If you have the file name, default file name, this command is fine. If you change the file name, then you need to give -f that file name. Up-d, detached mode. Docker, suppose see here, currently my application is executing. I am not able to execute any other command. Stop it. So when I do Control C, it is stopping my MySQL database and application. Both containers are stopped. When the containers are stopped, you can see Docker Compose PS. Docker Compose PS. So this is one container and this is another container. Both are stopped. Now, again, I can execute that Docker Compose up-d. This time I'm using Docker Compose up-d. Network is not created because it is already created. Started Spring Boot MySQL Docker Compose database container started, then application container started. When the database container and application containers are started, refresh the URL, we are able to access our application. We are able to access our application back. Still the data is available like this. Still the data is available like this. Okay, guys. Do you understand what is -d? When I execute -d, it created the containers and I'm able to execute the other commands. Now let me go for Docker Compose PS. When I go for a Docker Compose PS, what it is telling? Boss, your database image is running as one Docker container. Your application image is running as one Docker container. Like this. Tomorrow I will tell you how to check the logs of the container, how to troubleshoot the container, and how to write the Docker file, Docker Compose file. Okay? Yeah. So the project Git repository URL, I already mentioned in the notes. So this is the project. This project is developed by using Spring Boot with MySQL database. Spring Boot application is developed and for that we are creating the image. What about the MySQL? MySQL predefined image available in the Docker Hub. Our application will download that. Our Docker Compose will download that. Okay. Let me update the class notes for this. So today I want you people to practice this Docker Compose setup and Spring Boot application with the Docker Compose. You should be able to run that. Whatever I have explained in the class today, I want you people to do that before coming to tomorrow class. If you don't practice this, tomorrow you don't understand the Docker Compose file that I am going to write. Got my point? So I have given my Docker Compose file in the project repository. Using that, I want you to run the project. So tomorrow we will understand how to write that file on our own. Without a Docker Compose file, Docker Compose will not work. I'm updating the class notes. Yeah. Could you please check it, guys, and confirm? Is the latest notes updated in the portal? Could you please check it and confirm? Is the latest notes updated in the portal? Quickly, could you please confirm? Updated? Yes, perfect. Now, anybody having any questions, you can ask me.
Yes, hi
Sir.
sir.
One by one.
Hello, sir.
One by
Part
one.
of
Hello.
the compose.xml, are you writing it as part of the Spring Boot application itself, sir? Because
Compose YML, that is a Docker Compose YML. We will write that file.
but you write it as part of the Spring Boot application itself, sir?
What is the meaning of Spring Boot application itself? Whenever the project is available, how we are writing the Docker file, similarly, we will write the Docker Compose file also. We'll keep that in the project repository itself.
So after uploading the source code, you are writing the Docker.
Yeah, I mean, that depends on, sir. That depends on when we will write whether when the development is going on, or when the first time we are deploying our application to the dev environment, at that time we will write the Compose YMLs.
Okay, sir.
Ashok, I have one general question. In Docker Compose YML, we have given two information, right? Application container information and database container information.
Correct.
But as we learned in the architecture diagram, it should be front end, back end, then DB, right? So,
now, in this scenario, front end also is developed by using Spring Boot. One application contains a front end logic as well as back end logic also. Okay. In future, I will take a separate application for the front end and I will integrate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir,
hello, sir.
Hello,
sir,
sir.
yesterday you gave the assignment as React.js.
Correct.
Yeah. So I could not execute that expose value 5050 I gave, but it could not execute.
Not 5050, sir. It is 3000.
It is a default, sir.
Yeah, 3000 is the default for the React application.
Okay, sir. I will try, sir. And another question, sir. Sir, Docker Compose is managing the containers, right, sir? So
correct.
Then why we are using the Kubernetes?
That we will discuss in the Kubernetes concept, sir. Currently, we are learning the Docker Compose. What is the difference between the Docker Compose and Kubernetes? We'll discuss in the coming classes. Okay.
Okay, sir. And another question, sir. Yes, CMD and entry point both are creating the container, right, sir? So and another word you have to use the overriding side.
Overlay network. Overlay network. Right.
Sir, one question related to hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, one question related to Tomcat server. So how we can configure SSL certificates for Tomcat?
In the future, we will discuss those concepts, sir.
Okay, sir.
Hello, sir. In Spring Boot
Ashok, I'm having one doubt. Like in my local system, I am having an image like "Hello World." In public also, in global also, there is existing an image "Hello World." If
you do that, whenever you pull, and it is going to, so there should be a different tag name for the images, right? So whenever you have the image in the local already, and when you are pulling the image from there, it will override that image, right?
If I push whatever is in local, if I push that, it will override the global, or it will override under my username.
Whenever you do the push, it will not override the public image, which is global. In your account, your image will be stored. That's it.
Okay. This image which is stored under my account, this image can be accessed by some other people who is pulling globally?
Yeah. Yes, if it is public image, they can pull that. Now you are pulling my images, right? So that means my image is a public image. So similarly, if your image is public image, anybody can pull that.
But they have to use the correct tag name so that it won't override for pulling also.
Correct.
Okay.
Sir, can you use a multiple application in the single container?
You can specify that, but generally we don't do that.
Sir, is it possible or not in a Docker terminology?
In one container, we will run only one application. Okay. In the Kubernetes, there is a different concept. There you will understand. Can we run multiple applications in one container or not?
Hello, Ashok sir.
Yeah.
Abbas here, sir. Your old student. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Tell me.
Sir, when will you be free? I want to talk. Sir.
Yeah. Come to institute by 11 o'clock today. I will. My class will complete by 11 o'clock. Then you can come.
Sir, for establishing connection between Spring Boot application and database, we are defining inside the .properties file the details of data.
Tomorrow you will understand that. So today I did not write the Docker Compose, right? Tomorrow when I write the Docker Compose, I will tell you the relation between the boot and the database, where I am maintaining the relation between the application and the database.
Okay.
Somewhere we need to do the configuration. That configuration I will explain tomorrow.
Okay.
Ashok, this is Nagarjuna.
Sir,
Yeah, Pawan, go ahead. I have a couple of doubts.
Yeah, okay. Sir, when we use access URL in for a public IP colon port name, so which port name you should mention, sir? Either host or
host port. Always we will specify host port. Here my host and container port is same. So this is the host port. This is the container port. When we are accessing the application, always we need to specify host port, not the container.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir, in place of Docker compose.yaml file, can we write a JSON file also?
Docker Compose will support YML, sir. JSON.
This is Nagarjuna. Actually, I have a couple of doubts. See, actually, whenever we are running this one is the public IP, how we can going to run on the private IP?
That is AWS concept, sir. VPC concept will be available. So,
okay.
I mean, we are not running on the public IP. We are running the application on the Linux machine. To access that Linux machine, we are using public IP. Private IP, we can't access outside. Private IP will be used only within the network. That is VPC, Virtual Private Network in the AWS cloud. Using that private IP within the VPC, we can access. If you want to access outside, then you should go for only public IP.
Okay. See, actually here, whenever today we in the class, we have discussed about the how to configure the network on the Docker, correct? So actually we have the three types of Docker, the bridge, local, none like that. So whenever we can configure the bridge network, how to attach the my own IP address. If you don't mind, that will be explained. That is a good for us only like that.
You can't attach your own IP address for the containers now. Okay. So whenever your application is running inside a machine, that machine is having a public IP. This public IP will be mapped to the application domain name.
Okay.
Okay. You cannot map your IP address to that. That is not possible.
Yeah. In real time also not possible, or only
no. It's not possible.
Real time also not possible. Actually, whenever we can, machine will be running on the container. Which machine is running on the container, we can use the same IP address.
That machine IP we will map to the domain name.
Okay. So whenever we can run the applications, so we need to create the Route 53 and we can execute the applications. Correct.
Yes. So we need to purchase a domain and we need to register the domain, and the domain name we will map to our machine IP or our application URL.
Okay. See, actually
that we will discuss in the AWS classes, not now.
Okay. See, in the security, we are providing the 00 slash all the members. All the IPs we are providing. So we need to restrict the particular IPs like that, if you don't mind.
Yes, that is also possible in the AWS. In the AWS, VPC concept is available. In the VPC concept, there is a concept called NACL, Network Access Layer. There you can restrict the IP addresses also.
Yeah, NACL is that is Network Access Control, correct?
Correct. There only we can restrict. Actually, whatever the security group is available in the AWS, in the security group, we can configure only the rules to allow the traffic. We can't configure the rules to deny the traffic.
Okay.
To configure the rules to allow and deny as well, then you need to go for NACL. That is in the VPC.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Good.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, are you going to cover this AWS part also in this course?
AWS will be started separately, sir. That is a separate course. So you need to enroll for that course separately.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Hi, Ashok.
Hi, Ashok.
Hello.
Can we use multiple from keyword in Docker file?
Yes, we can use that.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Ashok. Like I have one question. See, in Docker Compose, we are maintaining only containers. Like so, image we have to build manually.
Yeah. Manually, we have to build the image. Now we are building the images manually. In future, everything will be automated. right? By using Jenkins, we are going to build the Docker image, and by using Jenkins, we'll execute the Docker compose. Everything will be automated. Whatever the work that we are doing manually will be automated through Jenkins.
Okay.
Sir, instead of command lines, do we have any GUI to handle all these commands?
No. Because Docker is installed on the Linux machine, so we need to execute the commands to perform all these operations.
Ashok, can we go with a Windows servers like that part instead of Linux Docker?
You can install the Docker on the Windows also, but in your machine, hypervisor software should be enabled. So a lot of people will face the problem with the BIOS settings. We need to make the changes at the BIOS in the Windows. That's why it is recommended to practice in the Linux machine, because in the real time, nobody will use Windows to deploy our applications.
Yeah, got it.
Yep.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, Ashok, in Docker file, we'll be mentioning from Ubuntu or from any Linux version. Already this Docker file is by default going to be executing in Amazon Linux. Since it is using Linux, why we have to mention some other flavor of Linux in Docker?
No need to specify that. We no need to specify that. I'm not. That is just for explanation purpose. I used it, but I'm not specifying that.
Okay.
I want at that time. I want to show you what is the from and how to use the from. That's why I specified. But in the reality, we don't specify.
Okay.
You see my application. Can you see from Ubuntu here? It's not there.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir. Divya here.
Good morning. Yeah. Hi, Divya.
Sir, I want to share my screen, sir.
Regarding?
I want to push Docker image into Docker Hub.
Yeah. So image push. Yeah, image push you can stop for now. Push is not mandatory. You just run the image and run the containers. So this Saturday I will take the doubts clarification session. Then I will solve all the push related problems.
Okay.
Yeah. So now to practice the application, push is not mandatory, right? You just create the image and run the image in your system. No need to push it now. Okay. Good. Fine, guys. So thanks for attending today. So please practice the Docker compose before coming to tomorrow's class. Notes is already updated. We'll meet in the tomorrow's class. Tomorrow we'll see how to write the Docker compose file. Thank you.